Hey kids, I have a message for all of the children who were friends with my father, who was known by some of you as Robert and by others of you as Uncle Bob, and by his grandchildren primarily as Papi, but there were a number of others that called him Papi as well. And I know that he would want you to understand a little bit more about what actually happened to him when he died, because we're all really sad about that. And death is really something really hard to understand. And we know that because he's a Christian, he went to heaven, but what does that mean? And you can't talk to anybody who's ever been to heaven. You can't ask them what it's like. You don't know um, anybody that can tell you exactly what it is where Papi has gone. And for this video, I'm gonna call him Papi. So I made up a little story for my own kids and for my nieces and nephews, and it's just a story. It's a little story. Actually, I've got two stories, and I'll make another video with the other one. But the story kind of helps you, if you're a kid, imagine what it would be like for Papi. And a story doesn't tell you the whole picture. It's not always a perfect description of what happened, for sure. It's just a story. And the first story I'm going to tell you is about a group of seeds. And of course, Papi is not a seed. And of course, this story is imaginary. It involves magical powers, but it might help you understand a little bit. Because the Bible says that when a Christian dies, and Papi was a Christian because he trusted in Jesus, that mortality is swallowed up by life. In other words, life comes and eats up mortality. Well, what is mortality? Mortality is everything that you can see that's living and breathing and that will one day die. So you're looking at mortality, my body, it's going to one day die. And a cat or a dog or a fish, anything that breathes and has life in it will one day die. That's mortality. But the Bible says that when a Christian dies, that his mortality is swallowed up by life. In other words, life wins. And doesn't that seem a little strange? Because we don't see life around us. We don't see Papi's life around us. So, first little story I want to tell you about is a group of seeds. They were a bunch of little seeds that could just like sit in the palm of a hand. And they were friends with each other. They looked at each other and they admired each other's shells, and they would often talk about, wow, he's got a nice hard shell and she's got a nice glistening shell, and they liked that. But one day those seeds were placed in the palm of a wonderful and powerful farmer who had powers to blow his life into those seeds. And so he took those seeds in his hands and blew. And into the seeds went the life of the farmer. And the farmer buried those seeds into the ground, and they could still see each other and talk about each other. They knew something had happened, but they weren't really sure exactly what it was. And they had some ideas that something would change in them because the farmer had put his life into them, but they didn't know. So they sat in the dirt and they soaked up the sun. They felt the rain and the moisture of the dirt ground, and they kept looking at each other and admiring each other. But the longer it got, they started noticing that the shells would seem wrinkly, and they would lose their shine. And they'd kind of joke about how they'd been shells for a long time and they were losing their shine. And then one day, it was really sad for all of them. One day, one of the seed shell just broke open. just completely split wide open. And they were all so sad. This was the end of that seed, they thought. But it burst open because inside of it was life. It was the life of the farmer. And out of that shell that became too small for the life, there burst a little plant, a green plant, that blossomed out through the ground and became a beautiful flower. You see, life could not fit in that shell anymore. The life of the farmer could not be in that shell and contained and held in by that shell anymore. The shell had to break. It had to get wrinkled and break open and die. Well, when Papi became a Christian, God the Father blew his life into Papi. And the life that was in Papi began to grow and grow and grow until finally the shell could not hold it any longer. And Papi has blossomed. And we don't see that yet because we're still in our shells. But that's what it means when death or mortality is swallowed up by victory.